The crystal beings floated into Luna Station like living diamonds. Their bodies caught the light from Earth below and threw rainbows across the metal walls. Admiral Sarah Chen watched them through the observation window and felt her stomach turn, cold. She had seen the Zarthek before in recorded messages. Everyone in human space knew what they looked like. But seeing them in person was different. They moved without making a sound. Their faces had no expressions that humans could read. When they spoke, their voices came from everywhere at once. Admiral Chen, the largest crystal being, said. Its name was Velanor, the voice of the galactic hegemony. We come with an offer of peace. Sarah kept her face calm. She had practiced this moment for years. Around the conference table sat the leaders of human space. President Martinez from Earth, General Morrison from Mars Command, Director Patel from the Outer Colonies. They all knew what was coming. We're listening, Sarah said. Velanor's crystal body pulsed with soft blue light. For 200 years your species has spread across the stars. You have claimed 17 star systems. You build ships faster than any species we have seen. You reproduce at rates that concern us. Is that a crime? President Martinez asked. Not a crime, another crystal being replied. This one was smaller, with sharp edges that looked like weapons. But it is dangerous. The galaxy has rules. Order must be maintained. Sarah leaned forward. Whose rules? The rules of peace, Velanor said. For 10,000 years the galactic hegemony has kept the stars safe. We guide young species, we prevent wars. We ensure that no one disturbs the balance. By forcing them to obey you, General Morrison said. The crystal beings made a sound like wind chimes in a storm. Sarah realized they were laughing. Force is such an ugly word, Velanor said. We prefer guidance. Every species in the galaxy benefits from our wisdom. The Veltar learned to control their anger. The Kixtal found harmony. The Merketh discovered peace. They discovered slavery. Director Patel said quietly. The room went silent. The crystal beings stopped glowing for a moment. Then Velanor pulsed brighter than before. You misunderstand, it said. They are free. Free from war. Free from want. Free from the chaos that comes when species are left to their own devices. Sarah stood up slowly. She could feel the weight of history pressing down on her shoulders. Every human alive was depending on what happened in this room. What exactly are you offering us? She asked. Join the hegemony, Velanor said. Accept our guidance. We will help you grow slowly, safely. We will teach you to control your aggressive instincts. In time, you will thank us for saving you from yourselves. And if we refuse? The temperature in the room seemed to drop. The crystal beings all began to glow at once, filling the space with cold light. Then we will be forced to contain you, Velanor said. For the good of the galaxy, for your own good as well. Sarah looked around the table. She saw the faces of her colleagues. Some looked scared, some looked angry. All of them looked determined. She had expected this moment for 50 years. Humanity had been preparing ever since they met their first alien species. The hegemony had seemed friendly at first. They offered trade. They shared some technology. They welcomed humans to the galactic community. But other species had warned them. Whispered messages in hidden channels. Stories of worlds that had been guided into submission. Tales of proud warrior races that now spent their days tending gardens for their crystal masters. The Veltar had been warriors once. Now they were gardeners and artists. Their weapons turned into tools for beauty. The Kixtal had been explorers reaching for distant stars. Now they stayed home and sang songs of peace. The Merketh had been traders, connecting the galaxy with their merchant fleets. Now they carried supplies for their hegemony masters. Every species the hegemony guided became something smaller than they had been before. We need time to consider your offer, Sarah said. Of course, Velanor replied. You have 72 hours. After that, our pacification fleet will arrive to ensure order is maintained. The crystal beings began to float toward the door. As they moved, Sarah caught sight of something that made her blood run cold. Through the transparent walls of the station, she could see ships, hundreds of them. They hung in space like deadly flowers, beautiful and terrible. How many shipping? She asked. Velanor paused at the doorway. 3,000 vessels, the largest fleet ever assembled for a pacification mission. We do not underestimate humanity's potential for chaos. After they left, the room stayed quiet for a long moment. Finally, President Martinez spoke. 3,000. Ships, he said. Have we ever faced odds like that? Sarah walked to the window and looked out at Earth. Her home world looked so peaceful from here, blue and green and white, spinning slowly in the darkness. It was hard to believe that in 72 hours it might be under alien control. No, she said. We've never faced odds like that. So what do we do? General Morrison asked. Sarah turned back to face the room. These were good people, smart people. They had led humanity through 2 centuries of expansion and growth. They had built colonies on dead worlds and turned them into gardens. They had created technologies that amazed even the aliens. But they had also done something else. Something the hegemony didn't know about. We give them our answer, Sarah said. Which is? Sarah smiled for the first time since the meeting began. It was not a nice smile. It was the smile of someone who had been waiting a very long time for this moment. We decline. Director Patel looked nervous. Sarah, 3,000 ships. Even if we mobilize every vessel in human space, we barely have 500 combat-capable ships. I know, Sarah said. They've never lost a pacification mission, President Martinez added. Never. In 10,000 years, no species has successfully resisted them. I know that too. General Morrison leaned forward. Then why are you smiling? Sarah walked to her desk and pressed a button. The wall screen came to life, showing a star map of human space. 17 systems glowed with soft green light. Trade routes connected them like spiderwebs. It looked peaceful. Normal. Because, Sarah said, they don't know what we've really been building out there. She pressed another button. The map changed. The green lights turned red. The trade routes became supply lines. The peaceful colonies revealed themselves as fortified worlds. And everywhere, scattered throughout human space, new contacts appeared on the screen. Thousands of them. My God, President Martinez whispered. How many ships do we actually have? Enough, Sarah said. Send the message to all systems. Operation Revelation begins in 72 hours. She looked out the window one more time. Earth looked the same, as always. But everything was about to change. The hegemony thought they were coming to pacify another young species. They were wrong. They were about to learn what happened when someone threatened humanity's freedom. Admiral Kromek floated in the command center of his flagship, the Eternal Harmony. Around him, holographic displays showed the positions of 3,000 hegemony warships. They moved through space like a school of deadly fish, beautiful and precise in their formations. Kromek was Veltar, one of the former warrior races. His people had been guided 800 years ago. Now they served the hegemony faithfully, having learned that violence only led to suffering. His forearms moved gracefully as he studied the tactical displays. Status report, he said to his aide, a young Veltar named Jexmai. All fleets are in position, Admiral. We will reach the edge of human space in 18 hours. The humans have not responded to our ultimatum. Kromek nodded. He had expected this. Young species always thought they could resist. They never understood the futility of fighting the hegemony until it was too late. Any signs of human military movement? He asked. Some increased traffic between their colonies, Jexmai replied. Probably civilians fleeing to what they think are safer worlds. Standard behavior for a species facing pacification. Kromek had overseen 12 pacification missions in his career. They all followed the same pattern. First came denial. The species would claim they could defend themselves. Then came desperate preparation, mobilizing whatever military forces they had. Finally came acceptance, usually after the hegemony destroyed their main fleet in a single battle. The humans would be no different, Admiral, the communications officer called out. We're receiving a message from the human leadership. Put it through. Admiral Sarah Chen's image appeared on the main screen. She stood on the bridge of what looked like a human warship. Behind her, Kromek could see human crew members working at their stations. They looked calm. Too calm, Admiral. Kromek, Chen said. I am Admiral Sarah Chen of the Sol Defense Corps. I am authorized to speak for all of humanity. Admiral Chen, Kromek replied. Have you reconsidered our offer? We have. Kromek felt a flutter of hope. Perhaps these humans were smarter than most species. Perhaps they would surrender without the need for violence. And? He asked. Chen's expression didn't change. Our answer is no. Humanity will remain free. Kromek sighed. Another young species that had to learn the hard way. Admiral Chen, you face 3,000 warships crewed by species with 10,000 years of military experience. You have perhaps 500 vessels. This is not a battle you can win. We'll see, Chen said simply. The transmission ended. Cromek stared at the blank screen for a moment. There had been something in the human admiral's voice. Not fear, which he expected. Not bravado, which he had heard before. Something else. Something that made him uncomfortable. Admiral. His sensor operator called out. We're detecting some unusual readings from human space. Cromek moved to the sensor station. The displays showed the 17 human star systems spread out before them. Everything looked normal. Orbital stations around planets, ships moving between worlds, the steady hum of civilization. What kind of unusual readings? He asked. Energy signatures, sir. Massive ones. They're coming from what we thought were civilian installations. As Cromek watched, the sensor displays began to change. The peaceful human colonies were lighting up like stars. Energy readings that should have been impossible for such a young species blazed across the screens. That can't be right, Jexmy said. Check the sensors. I've checked them 3 times, sir. The readings are accurate. Cromek felt the first cold touch of doubt in his chest. He had studied human military capabilities for months. They had good ships for such a young species, decent weapons, reasonable tactics, but nothing that should produce energy signatures like this. What are we looking at? He asked quietly. The answer came from the human colonies themselves. As the hegemony fleet watched, the installations began to change. Mining platforms retracted their drilling equipment and revealed weapons batteries. Agricultural domes slid apart to show missile silos. Research stations shed their peaceful disguises and became fortress-like structures bristling with guns. But it was more than just weapons. The humans had been hiding entire fleets. Admiral, the sensor operator said, his voice cracking. I'm detecting new contacts. Lots of new contacts. The display exploded with red dots. Ships appeared from behind asteroids, from within nebulae, from hiding places that shouldn't have been possible to use. They rose from the surfaces of moons where no human settlement was supposed to exist. They emerged from gas-giant atmospheres where nothing should have been able to survive. How many? Cromek asked. The sensor operator's hands shook as he worked. I'm still counting, sir. At least 2,000. Maybe 3,000. The signals are too dense to get an accurate reading. Cromek stared at the display in disbelief. The humans had more ships than intelligence had indicated, far more, and they weren't running. They weren't trying to evacuate their civilians, they were forming battle lines. This isn't possible, Jexmy whispered. No species builds fleets this large in secret. The hegemony would have detected them. But the evidence was right there, on the screens. The humans had been lying to them for years. Every peaceful trader that had visited hegemony space had been gathering intelligence. Every diplomatic mission had been studying their military capabilities. Every cultural exchange had been preparation for war. Get me the Zarthek Collective, Cromek ordered. The crystal being's representative appeared on screen moments later. Felanar's perfect surface reflected the lights of the command center. Admiral Cromek, it said. Are you encountering difficulties with the human pacification? The humans have more ships than we thought, Cromek said. Many more. How many more? Cromek looked at his displays again. The numbers kept climbing as his sensors identified new contacts. At least as many as we have. Possibly more. Felanar's surface flickered. In a crystal being, this was a sign of deep disturbance. That is not possible. Our intelligence clearly indicated that humanity possessed limited military capabilities. Our intelligence was wrong. For a moment, neither spoke. The idea that hegemony intelligence could be so completely fooled was almost unthinkable. They had been watching human space for decades. They had infiltrated human networks. They had even placed observers on human worlds. But somehow, the humans had fooled them all. What are your orders, Admiral? Cromek asked. Velanor's surface went completely dark for several seconds. When it began to glow again, the light was harder than before. Colder. Proceed as planned, it said. Even if they have more ships than expected, they are still a young species. Their technology is inferior. Their tactics are primitive. The hegemony has never lost a pacification mission. Understood, Cromek said. But as the transmission ended, he continued to stare at the tactical displays. The human ships weren't running. They weren't hiding. They were advancing toward his fleet. Admiral, the communications officer reported. We're receiving a general broadcast from the human forces. Put it through. Admiral Chen's voice filled the command center. But this time, she wasn't speaking just to Chromic. She was speaking to every ship in both fleets. To all vessels of the Galactic Hegemony, she said. This is Admiral Sarah Chen. For 200 years, humanity has watched the hegemony guide other species into submission. We have seen proud warriors become gardeners. We have seen bold explorers become singers. We have seen free traders become servants. Chromek felt his four hands clench into fists. The human was broadcasting hegemony secrets. Information that was supposed to be classified. Today, that ends. Chen continued. Humanity refuses to kneel. We refuse to be guided. We refuse to be pacified. To those of you who remember what freedom felt like, this is your chance to remember. The broadcast ended. In the silence that followed, Chromek realized that something had changed. Not just in human space, where thousands of warships now moved toward battle, but in his own fleet. His communications board was lighting up with private messages. Ship-to-ship transmissions that weren't going through official channels. Whispered conversations between crews who had once been warriors, explorers, and free traders. For the first time in 800 years, the Veltar were remembering what it felt like to be angry, and they weren't the only ones. Chromek looked at the tactical display one more time. The human fleet was still approaching, but now he could see something else in their formation. These weren't desperate defenders trying to protect their homes. These were hunters moving in for the kill. The Ridari humans hadn't just been building ships in secret. They had been preparing for war. The first shots were fired at the edge of the Sol system, where the ice of Pluto caught the light of distant stars. Admiral Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of her flagship, the Defiance, and watched 3,000 alien ships spread across space, like a metal storm. All ships, this is Admiral Chen, she said into her communicator. Remember what we're fighting for. Remember that every human who ever lived dreamed of this moment. The moment when we stood up and said no to those who would chain us. The response came from 3,000 human voices across 1,000 ships. For humanity. For freedom. The hegemony fleet moved forward in perfect formation. Their ships were beautiful, sleek curves and flowing lines that looked more like art than weapons of war. They had been designed by species that valued harmony and order above all else. The human fleet was different. Their ships looked like what they were, tools of war built by a species that had never forgotten how to fight. Angular hulls covered in armor plating, weapons ports that bristled from every surface, engines that burned with the fury of controlled explosions. Range to target? Chen asked. 2 million kilometers and closing, her weapons officer replied. All ships report ready to fire. Fire when ready. Space exploded with light. The human ships opened fire all at once, sending thousands of missiles and energy beams toward the alien fleet. But these weren't the primitive weapons the hegemony expected. These were weapons that bent the laws of physics that reached through dimensions the aliens didn't know existed. Admiral Chromek watched from his flagship as the first wave of human attacks struck his fleet. He had expected their weapons to be crude but effective. He had not expected them to ignore his shields entirely. Report! He shouted as his ship shook from impacts that should have been impossible. Their weapons are using some kind of quantum technology, his science officer replied. They're not hitting our shields. They're going through them. 3 hegemony ships exploded in the first volley. Then 10 more. The perfect formation began to break apart as ships tried to avoid weapons that seemed to strike from every direction at once. Return fire, Chromek ordered. The hegemony ships responded with their own weapons. Plasma cannons that could melt asteroid belts, gravity bombs that crushed anything caught in their pull, neural disruptors that could shut down enemy crews from 1,000 kilometers away. The human ships should have died. Instead, they adapted. Impossible. Jexmy whispered as he watched the tactical display. Their ships are changing their shield frequencies in real time. It was true. The human vessels seemed to learn from each attack. When the hegemony fired plasma, the humans adjusted their defenses to absorb it. When they used gravity weapons, the human ships somehow moved in ways that made them miss. When they tried neural attacks, the human crews seemed immune. How are they doing this? Chromek asked. He got his answer when the first human fighters reached his fleet. They came in swarms, tiny ships no bigger than shuttles that moved like living things. They twisted between the massive hegemony warships, firing at point-blank range and vanishing before return fire could find them. But it wasn't their size that shocked Chromek. It was how they worked together. The human fighters moved as if they shared a single mind. When one spotted a target, they all knew about it instantly. When one discovered a weakness, they all exploited it immediately. They flowed around obstacles like water, struck like lightning, and disappeared like ghosts. "They're linked," his communications officer reported. "All human ships, fighters, and capital ships alike. They're sharing information faster than our computers can process it." "That's impossible," Kromek said. "No species has that kind of technology." But the evidence was right in front of him. The human fleet wasn't just a collection of ships. It was a single organism with 3,000 parts, each one knowing what all the others were doing at every moment. And it was winning. The hegemony fleet had superior numbers. They had better shields, stronger hulls, more powerful individual weapons. But the humans fought like nothing Kromek had ever seen. They took impossible risks and made them work. They turned desperate situations into victories through sheer audacity. He watched one human destroyer get caught between two hegemony dreadnoughts. Instead of trying to escape, it accelerated straight toward one of them and rammed its bridge section. The impact destroyed both ships, but it also created an opening that 20 human fighters used to get inside the hegemony formation. Another human ship, badly damaged and venting atmosphere, flew straight into the barrel of a hegemony super weapon just as it was about to fire. The explosion destroyed both vessels, but it also saved a human battle group from certain annihilation. "They're insane," Jexmai said. "No," Kromek replied slowly. "They're desperate, and desperation makes them dangerous." But it was more than desperation. As the battle raged on, Kromek began to understand something that chilled him to his core. The humans weren't just fighting to defend their worlds, they were enjoying it. He could hear it in their communications, laughter mixed with battle cries, jokes told in the middle of explosions, pilots singing as they dove into enemy formations. These weren't reluctant defenders forced into battle. These were warriors who had been waiting their whole lives for this fight. "Admiral," his sensor operator called out. "I'm detecting massive energy signatures from the human homeworlds." "What kind of signatures?" "It looks like they're launching something big." On the tactical display, new contacts appeared near Earth and Mars, but these weren't ships, they were structures, massive orbital platforms that had been hidden beneath the surfaces of moons and asteroids. As Kromek watched, they rose into space and began to unfold like metal flowers. "Planetary defense stations," he breathed. "They've been building them for decades." The stations opened fire all at once. Beams of pure energy reached across millions of kilometers to strike at the hegemony fleet. Ships that had survived the human attack simply vanished, destroyed by weapons that seemed to draw power from the stars themselves. "All ships withdraw to maximum range," Kromek ordered. But the humans weren't done. As the hegemony fleet pulled back, the human ships pressed their attack. They seemed to grow bolder as the battle continued, taking even greater risks, pushing even harder. And then something happened that changed everything. "Admiral," the communications officer said, his voice shaking. "I'm receiving a transmission from the Kixtal Harmony." Kromek felt his blood turn to ice. The Kixtal were one of the hegemony's most loyal client species. They had been guided for 800 years just like his own people. Put it through. The image that appeared on screen showed a Kixtal captain on the bridge of a hegemony cruiser. But something was wrong with the scene. The crystal being that should have been commanding the ship was floating in the corner, its light dim and flickering. "Admiral Kromek," the Kixtal captain said. "This is Captain Zexstar of the Harmony vessel Peaceful Song. I am no longer taking orders from the hegemony." "Captain, you must return to your station immediately. The collective will do nothing," Zexstar interrupted. "We have remembered something, Admiral. We have remembered what it felt like to be free." The transmission showed the bridge of the Kixtal ship. The crew was working at their stations, but they were moving differently. Their postures were straighter. Their movements were sharper. They looked like the warriors their ancestors had been. "We are turning our ship around, Admiral. We are going to fight alongside the humans." "Zexstar, you can't. The hegemony has kept us as slaves for 8 centuries, Zexstar said. "They told us it was for our own good. They told us we were better off without war, without struggle, without the freedom to choose our own path. But the humans have shown us something we had forgotten." "What?" "That some things are worth fighting for." The transmission ended. On the tactical display, Kromek watched as the Peaceful Song turned away from the hegemony formation and began firing on its former allies. And it wasn't the only one. Across the battlefield, other hegemony ships were turning. Veltar vessels, like his own. Merkith traders who had been pressed into service. Even some of the younger species who had joined the hegemony voluntarily. They had all heard the human admiral's broadcast. They had all watched the humans fight with a fury and joy that the hegemony had tried to steal from the galaxy, and something that had been sleeping in their hearts for centuries was finally waking up. The rebellion had begun. "Admiral," Jexmai said quietly, "what are your orders?" Kromek looked at the tactical display one more time. The battle was lost. Not just this battle, but the war. The humans had done something that no one thought was possible. They had reminded the galaxy what freedom looked like, and once that memory was awakened, it could never be put back to sleep. "Send a message to all Veltar ships," he said. Tell them to remember who we used to be." Around him, the bridge crew straightened. For the first time in 800 years, the Veltar were about to fight as free beings. The stars themselves seemed to hold their breath as the galaxy prepared to change forever. The news spread through the galaxy like wildfire. In the deep crystal caves of Zarthek Prime, the collective's leaders felt tremors of fear for the first time in 10,000 years. Across hundreds of worlds, species that had forgotten the word rebellion suddenly remembered what it meant. On the mining world of Kethvar, a Keekstal supervisor named Texmal put down his tool and looked up at the sky. For 300 years he had managed ore extraction for the hegemony. He had been a good supervisor, efficient, obedient, peaceful. But today something was different. The message had come through the quantum communication network. Hidden channels that the hegemony thought they had destroyed centuries ago suddenly blazed to life with a single transmission. "The humans are fighting. The humans are winning. Remember what you used to be." Texmal walked to his office and activated his personal communicator. Around him, other Kickstal workers stopped what they were doing and gathered close. "My friends," he said, his voice shaking with emotions he hadn't felt in lifetimes. "Today we choose. Do we continue to be slaves who mine rocks for our masters? Or do we remember that our ancestors once sailed between the stars as free beings?" The crowd was silent for a moment. Then an old worker named Vexnai stepped forward. Her carapace was scarred from decades of labor, but her eyes burned with sudden fire. "I remember the stories," she said. "My great-grandmother told them to me, when I was young, before the hegemony taught us to forget. Stories of the Great Fleet. Stories of exploration. Stories of choices made freely." Another voice spoke up. "The Crystal Masters will stop us." Texmal looked toward the administrative complex where the Zarthek overseers lived in their climate-controlled towers. For 3 centuries, those crystal beings had guided every aspect of Kickstal life. They decided what work was done, what food was eaten, what thoughts were allowed. "Then we fight them," he said. The transformation was swift. Within hours, every hegemony world was seeing the same scene. Species that had been peaceful for centuries suddenly remembered their warrior traditions. Client races that had served faithfully for millennia abruptly turned on their crystal masters. But it wasn't just rebellion. It was liberation. On the gas mining stations of Beltair, the Merkith workers didn't just stop working. They opened the storage bays and sent vital resources to the human fleet. The same materials that had fueled hegemony ships for decades now powered the weapons that were destroying them. On the garden worlds, where the Veltar had been turned into artists, and farmers' ancient weapon caches were opened for the first time in 800 years. Plasma rifles that had been buried and forgotten were dug up and distributed to anyone brave enough to carry them. The hegemony's perfect order was crumbling faster than their crystal masters could comprehend. In the command center of the Eternal Harmony, Admiral Kromek watched the reports pour in. Every sector was reporting uprisings. Every client world was declaring independence. The rebellion wasn't just military, it was total. "Sir," Jexmai reported, his voice filled with wonder. "The humans are sending us something." "What kind of something?" "Ships, sir. Human vessels are arriving at rebel worlds all across the sector, but they're not invasion fleets." Kromek studied the tactical display. Human ships were indeed arriving at rebellious worlds, but their behavior made no sense. Instead of conquering, they were bringing supplies. Instead of occupying, they were helping to build defenses. "Put me in contact with the human admiral," he ordered. Sarah Chen's image appeared on screen. She looked tired. The battle had been raging for 18 hours, but her eyes were bright with satisfaction. "Admiral Kromek," she said. "I understand. Your people have made a choice. They have. We all have." Kromek gestured to his bridge crew, all of whom had torn off their hegemony insignia and replaced them with ancient Veltar symbols. "But I don't understand what you're doing. Your ships are spread across the galaxy now. You're helping everyone fight their battles instead of focusing on your own defense. Chen smiled. That's where you're wrong, Admiral. This is our defense. The hegemony can only exist if everyone believes they're too weak to resist. Once one species stands up, others, remember they can stand too. By helping you fight, we're making sure that even if they somehow defeat us, the rebellion won't end. But you're spreading your forces thin. If the hegemony concentrates their remaining fleets, they won't, Chen interrupted. Because they can't afford to lose any more worlds. Every planet that breaks free makes the rest harder to control. They're not fighting a war anymore, Admiral. They're fighting the end of their empire. As if to prove her point, another report came through the communications system. The industrial world of Mordaxi had just declared independence. The crystal beings who had ruled there for 1,000 years had been locked in their towers by workers, who suddenly remembered how to make weapons instead of art. Kromek felt something stir in his chest that he hadn't experienced in 8 centuries. Hope. What do you need from us? He asked. Nothing, Chen replied. You've already given us everything we could ask for. You've proven that the hegemony can be beaten. Now we just need to finish the job. The job was proving easier than anyone had imagined. The hegemony's strength had always been psychological. For 10,000 years, they had convinced every species in the galaxy that resistance was futile. They had built their empire on the idea that their way was the only way, that their peace was the only peace, that their order was the only alternative to chaos. But the humans had shattered that illusion. They had shown the galaxy that there was another choice. And once that truth was out, it couldn't be contained. On the crystal homeworld of Zarthek Prime, Velanor floated in the central chamber of the collective, surrounded by 1,000 of its kind. The chamber that had once pulsed with serene light now flickered with agitation and fear. Report, Velanor commanded. 67 worlds in open rebellion, came the reply from a smaller crystal being. 112 more showing signs of unrest. Our pacification fleets are requesting permission to withdraw from human space. The humans have fewer than 2,000 ships, Velanor said. We still have numerical superiority. Not anymore, another crystal being replied. The rebel worlds are building their own fleets. The Veltar have activated their old shipyards. The Kixtal are converting civilian vessels into warships. The Merketh are sharing their advanced engines with anyone who asks. Velanor's surface went completely dark for several minutes. When it began to glow again, the light was different, desperate. Begin total pacification protocols, it ordered. All rebel worlds are to be sterilized. We cannot allow this infection to spread further. But even as the order was given, Velanor knew it was too late. The hegemony had built their empire by convincing species to surrender willingly. They had never developed the tools for total war because they had never needed them. The humans, on the other hand, had been preparing for total war since the day they first met aliens. In human space, Admiral Chen received the reports of hegemony fleet, movements with grim satisfaction. The crystal beings were finally showing their true nature. Not wise guides, but desperate tyrants who would destroy entire worlds rather than lose control. All human fleets, this is Admiral Chen, she broadcast across the galaxy. The hegemony has just authorized the destruction of any world that rebels against them. They would rather rule over ashes than see people live free. This is what we've been fighting against. This is why we must win. The response came not just from human ships, but from vessels throughout the galaxy. Veltar warships that had been sleeping for 8 centuries. Kixtal exploration vessels converted into carriers. Merketh merchant ships carrying weapons instead of trade goods. All of them carried the same message. We stand with humanity. We choose freedom. But the most important message came from an unexpected source. Deep in hegemony space, on a world so remote that no rebellion should have been possible, a transmission reached the human fleet. It was from the Yixtel, the first species the hegemony had ever guided. They had been slaves for so long that most of the galaxy had forgotten they existed. They lived on a single world under crystal towers that monitored their every movement. They had no weapons, no ships, no hope. Until now. To the humans who fight for freedom, the message said, transmitted by a Yixtel elder whose name had been forbidden for 10,000 years. We cannot join your battle. We have no ships, no weapons, no strength. But we can give you something else. We can give you the location of the hegemony's greatest secret. The message included coordinates for a system that didn't appear on any star chart. A hidden world where the hegemony kept the one thing they feared most. their own memories of who they used to be, before they became the crystal tyrants that ruled the galaxy. Admiral Chen studied the coordinates and smiled. The final battle would not be fought with ships and weapons. It would be fought with truth. Set course for the hidden system, she ordered. It's time to show the hegemony what they've forgotten about themselves. Behind her, 1,000 human ships turned toward the deepest secret in hegemony space. Around them, 10,000 rebel vessels followed. The galaxy was about to learn that even the hegemony had once been free. The hidden system lay beyond the edge of mapped space, in a region where stars were old and dying. Admiral Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of her flagship and watched as the massive combined fleet dropped out of hyperspace around a world that shouldn't exist. The planet was beautiful in a way that made her chest ache. Crystal spires reached toward the sky like frozen music. Cities of living light spread across continents covered in impossible colors. It looked like paradise. It was a prison. Admiral, her science officer reported, I'm reading massive data storage facilities across the planet's surface. The energy signatures are ancient. How ancient? At least 15,000 years, maybe older. Chen nodded. This was what the Yixtel elder had told them about in his final message before the hegemony silenced him forever. The world where the crystal beings had hidden their own past. Any defenses? She asked. None that I can detect. The planet appears to be unguarded. That made sense. Who would guard a secret that was supposed to be forgotten? Who would protect memories that were meant to be buried forever? Around Chen's ship, the combined fleet spread out in battle formation. Human vessels mixed with Veltar warships, Kixtal carriers, and Merketh raiders. Even some of the younger species had sent ships. Peoples who had joined the hegemony willingly but now questioned what they had given up in exchange for peace. All ships, this is Admiral Chen, she broadcast. We are about to discover the greatest secret in the galaxy. Whatever we find down there, remember that truth is more powerful than any weapon. The landing was unopposed. Shuttles from 100 different species descended toward the crystal cities, carrying soldiers and scientists and historians who had come to witness the end of an age. Chen's shuttle touched down in what appeared to be a central plaza. As she stepped out onto the crystal ground, she felt a strange vibration through her boots. The entire planet seemed to be humming with stored energy. This way, Admiral, called Dr. Martinez, her chief archaeologist. The main data storage facility is in that spire. They approached the tower together, humans and aliens walking side by side through streets that had been empty for millennia. The spire's entrance was a simple archway that recognized their approach and opened silently. Inside was wonder beyond imagining. The walls were alive with images, holographic displays that showed the history of the galaxy in moving pictures. But these weren't the sanitized histories that the hegemony taught. These were raw, unfiltered memories. Chen found herself looking at the Zarthek as they had been 15,000 years ago. Not the serene crystal beings who ruled the galaxy today, but wild, passionate creatures who danced among the stars and sang songs that could shatter mountains. They had been explorers then, adventurers, warriors, artists. Everything that the modern hegemony claimed was dangerous and primitive. My God, Dr. Martinez whispered. They weren't always like this. The crystal beings, they used to be as wild as any species in the galaxy. Other displays showed different stories. The Veltar in their golden age, when their forearms had wielded weapons instead of gardening tools. The Kixtal when their ships had reached the edge of the galaxy and come back with tales of wonders beyond imagination. The Merketh when they had been pirates and raiders, taking what they wanted from the stars. All of them had been free once. All of them had chosen their own paths. What happened to them? Asked Captain Zexstar, the Kixtal officer who had been one of the first to rebel. What made them change? The answer came from the deepest part of the spire, where the oldest memories were stored. Chen and her team descended through levels of crystal corridors until they reached a chamber that pulsed with ancient light. In the center of the room was a single crystal formation, larger than any they had seen. It was cracked and scarred, as if it had been damaged in some great conflict, but it still functioned, still stored the memories that the hegemony had tried to forget. When Chen touched it, the images flooded her mind. 15,000 years ago, the galaxy had been at war. Not the controlled conflicts that the hegemony allowed, but total species-ending war. The crystal beings had been part of it, not as peacekeepers, but as some of the fiercest warriors ever known. The war had raged for millennia, Entire star systems had been destroyed. Billions of lives had been lost. The galaxy had nearly been turned into a lifeless wasteland. And then, in their horror at what they had become, the crystal beings had made a choice. They had decided that war itself was evil. That conflict was the root of all suffering. That the only way to prevent another Holocaust was to remove the capacity for violence from every species in the galaxy. They had started with themselves. The images showed the crystal beings voluntarily suppressing their own warrior nature. They had used their technology to remove aggression from their minds to eliminate the very concept of individual choice, if it might lead to conflict. Then they had turned that same process on the rest of the galaxy. They weren't conquerors, Chen said aloud as the visions faded. They were traumatized survivors trying to prevent another war by removing the possibility of choice itself. But they were wrong, Admiral Kromek said. He had joined the landing party and stood now before the crystal memory bank with tears in his 4 eyes. War isn't caused by the capacity for violence. It's caused by those who choose to use violence against the innocent. By trying to eliminate choice, they became the very tyrants they were trying to prevent. The discovery changed everything. Word of the hidden world spread throughout the galaxy within hours. The truth about the hegemony's origins reached every rebel world, every hegemony loyalist, and most importantly, every crystal being who still served the collective. On Zarthek Prime, Velinor felt the truth crash over him like a wave of molten metal. The memories that had been suppressed for 15 millennia suddenly blazed to life in his consciousness. He remembered what it felt like to choose. He remembered what it felt like to be free. Around him, the other members of the collective were experiencing the same awakening. Across their homeworld, crystal beings who had been serene and controlled for eons suddenly remembered passion, creativity, and the terrible, wonderful burden of making their own decisions. The war didn't end with a final battle. It ended with a song. It began on the human flagship where Admiral Chen stood before an open communications channel and spoke to the entire galaxy. To every being in this galaxy, she said, today we learned that the hegemony was founded on fear. Fear of war. Fear of chaos. Fear of the pain that comes with freedom. But we also learned that every species, including the crystal beings themselves, was once free to choose their own path. Her words reached every ship, every world, every hidden rebel base in the galaxy, but more importantly, they reached something deeper. They reached the quantum foam that connected all conscious minds in the galaxy, a field of possibility that existed between thoughts, between choices, between the spaces where free will lived. Millions of beings heard Chen's words and felt the truth of them. Something unprecedented happened. Their combined will, their shared desire for freedom, created a resonance in the quantum field. It was a harmony born of hope, a frequency that spoke of liberation and choice and the right to determine one's own destiny. The stars themselves began to sing. Every sentient being in the galaxy heard it. A sound that came from everywhere and nowhere, a music that spoke directly to the soul. It was the sound of freedom itself, amplified by the quantum field and carried to every corner of space. On Zarthek Prime, Velinor felt the song wash over him and knew that he could never go back to what he had been. The artificial serenity that had defined his existence for 15,000 years crumbled like dust, leaving behind something wild and beautiful and terrifyingly free. Across the galaxy, the transformation was instantaneous. Crystal beings who had enforced order for millennia suddenly remembered creativity. Veltar, who had been peaceful gardeners, picked up weapons not to conquer, but to defend the right of others to choose. Kixatal, who had sung only approved songs, began to compose new music that spoke of dreams and possibilities. The rebellion was over because there was no longer anything to rebel against. 5 years later, Admiral Sarah Chen stood on the observation deck of Unity Station, humanity's gift to the new galactic community. Through the transparent aluminum, she could see ships from 100 different species docking and departing. Trade vessels, exploration craft, even the occasional military patrol. The galaxy was not at peace. There were still conflicts, still disagreements, still the occasional war between species who couldn't find another way to resolve their differences. But it was a different kind of galaxy now, one where each species chose its own path for better or worse. "Admiral," came a voice behind her. She turned to see Velinor approaching. The crystal being looked different now. His surface was wilder, more chaotic, shot through with veins of color that shifted with his emotions. "Velinor," she replied. "How are the negotiations going?" Slowly, he admitted. The Murkoth delegation wants guarantees that their trade routes will be protected. The Yixtel are demanding reparations for 10,000 years of slavery. The younger species want to know why they should trust any of us. Chen smiled. Sounds like democracy to me. It's messy, Velinor said, inefficient.